There's a problem with the FAA Part 107 study materials, and if you've noticed it, you're not alone. Right now, there is no official structured sectional charts study guide that actually breaks things down in a way that makes sense for new remote pilots. In this video, I'm going to show you 20 of the most difficult topics on the FAA Part 107 exam, especially the ones that will trip up even the most prepared students. So, I'm going to simplify them so that way you can actually understand them and apply them on test day. But first, here's a fundamental question. Do you know how to read sectional charts? And why do sectional charts even exist in the first place? All of this right after this. Let's go. So you've downloaded the Airman Knowledge Testing Supplement for remote pilots and started using this as a study guide. Well, that's a problem because it's not a study guide. And if you're using it like one, then you're going to miss some very critical concepts on the test. The Airman Knowledge Testing Supplement is not designed to teach you anything. It doesn't explain concepts, it doesn't walk you through the answers, and it doesn't prepare you step by step for anything. Instead, it's a reference booklet that's given to you so that way you'll be able to use this on the actual Part 107 exam. So the first difficult topic we're going to talk about will be sectional charts. Now, I get a lot of questions about sectional charts on my website. A lot of the members are saying that they just can't grab it, they just don't understand it, and I've had a lot of questions coming in, particularly about figure number 25. And I'm going to go over figure number 25 because if you understand figure 25, then you're going to be able to understand a lot of these other figures on the sectional charts also. So we're going to pay attention to this figure right here. But first, let's turn to page 1 of 1 and talk about the legend. Now, the legend in the FAA Airman's Knowledge Testing Supplement is one of the most important sections for the FAA knowledge exams. It's basically a decoder for sectional charts, airport diagrams, aviation symbols, and it explains all of the lines, the colors, the symbols, and the markings on these charts. But keep in mind that the legend and the supplement itself is not a study guide. It's a reference booklet provided to you during the test. And in some cases, you won't be receiving a booklet. You will have all of the charts and the information on computer screen in some of the tested areas. Now, Part 107 test takers need to understand that the legend is crucial because many of the questions involve identifying controlled airspace, recognizing airport types, and determining authorization if it's required. You need to memorize the legend because if you try to take the exam without proper memorization, you'll be referring back to the legend, and that's when it becomes confusing. Think about this for a moment. If you were driving a car, would you go to the car owner's manual to try to figure out where the brakes were? No. You'd need to know that information beforehand so that way you can drive the car smoothly. And if you want to take the Part 107 exam in a smooth and easy fashion, you're going to have to memorize this so that way when you see the questions on the exam, all you have to do is basically go off of memory and use the reference as a source of an emergency situation when you can't remember something. So let me see if I can help you remember all of the symbols and the markings on this legend so that way you won't have to revert back to it. Let's start with the first symbol first under the airport category. The first two symbols at the very top, the magenta circle and the blue circle, both say other than hard-surfaced runways. Now, what does that actually mean? There's no explanation here, right? But I'm going to explain it to you. You see, when you see these two symbols, and you'll see them on a sectional chart, for example, if you go to any sectional chart, you will find one of these type of symbols on the sectional chart. What it means, or what it refers to, is that the airport does not have a paved runway, such as an asphalt or a concrete runway. Instead, these airports have runways that are made of grass, dirt, gravel, sand, turf, clay. And if you pay attention to the colors of these symbols, you will see that all of the magenta colored symbols are the ones with no airport towers, and the ones that are blue have control towers. So in this situation, the magenta does not have a control tower with a soft runway, and the blue does have a control tower with a soft runway. Now let me just explain something very quickly so that you all understand. You can thank Matthew because I had to call Matthew personally on the phone and speak with him, one of my website members, to tell him exactly what it is that he was missing. You see, he couldn't understand the difference between airspace colors and airport runway colors. They're completely two separate things, so when you're taking the Part 107 exam, keep them completely separate. A ring around an airport or layers around an airport will have a certain color, and the airport runways themselves will have a certain color. So therefore, that gives you the distinction or the differentiation between understanding whether you're in Class B airspace, Class C airspace, Class D airspace. But the color itself in regard to the airport runways is completely different. So when you see a magenta runway on your sectional chart or on the exam, that means that there is no tower. When you see a blue airport or blue airport runway, that means that there is a control tower. So let's continue with this whole thing. Now look just to the right of that and you will see a magenta anchor symbol that says Seaplane Base. Now what exactly does that mean? Well, this symbol represents an airport that is operating in a designated area where a plane or an aircraft can take off and land on water. On a sectional chart, the anchor symbol tells the pilots that seaplane activities will occur there. And what it's also indicating is that extra caution is needed within this vicinity. Now, because it's a magenta color, what does that tell you? Of course, it tells you or it indicates that the seaplane base is non-towered. Now, if you go to your Airman's Knowledge Testing Supplement, go to Figure 22, Area 1, just southeast of Sandpoint Airport, SZT, you will see that there is a magenta-colored anchor there, a symbol, and that is going to be for a seaplane base, exactly what we just discussed. Now, I should mention that this base is officially registered with the FAA, but the problem here is when we're looking at the sectional chart, how do you determine the name of the base? You see there are two of them, right? And that's a little bit confusing. There's Bird 2 PVT, and just below there's Lake Penn O'Reilly. Well, here's the information. The airport data will always be directly below the anchor, and the anchor will be pointing towards the airport data. So in this case, it's going to be Lake Penn O'Reilly S96. And for some of the other seaplane bases that you'll find on sectional charts, well, they'll all be the same thing. Now, all of these other symbols that you're looking at under the airports category, just below those two that I just showed you, are all self-explanatory. You just need to make sure that you memorize these so you know when you see them on the exam, you'll know exactly what it is that they mean. Now, as promised, we're going to be going over Figure 25, particularly Area 4, Fort Worth Alliance. And I'm going to show you exactly why it is that no one wants to explain this, because directly in the center of Fort Worth Alliance are 2 floors of Class B airspace, and nobody knows exactly how to explain which classification of airspace, or should I say, which floor or which layer is the one that is directly over the airport. And I said that because this is a question that came up and it's very confusing. So let's look at the chart right now so I can explain it to you. Do you notice as I zoom into Fort Worth Alliance AFW that there are actually 2 floors of Class B airspace that are split directly above the Class D airspace of Fort Worth Alliance? Now, if you didn't know that that was Class D because of the dashed blue lines, you needed to memorize that in the legend. You should not try to be thinking about whether that's Class D or C or E. You should automatically know what class of airspace you're dealing with at Fort Worth Alliance AFW. So there are 2 layers of Class B airspace directly above that airport. Now, the thing that I just mentioned to you, what I just said explicitly was directly above, that there were 2, but that is not correct. There is only 1 layer of Class B airspace that is directly above that airport. And the way that you know which one it is that the airport runways are positioned in one of those layers or one of those floors of Class B airspace. And what you should be visualizing is this. Suppose you were standing right on the runway and someone asked you, what is directly above your head? Well, when you turned your head or lifted your head to look up, the only thing that you would see is a Class B airspace. You wouldn't see 2 layers of Class B airspace. You would only see 1 in this scenario because there is only 1 layer of Class Class B airspace that is directly over those runways or that airport. So now, can you see visually and predominantly which layer of Class B airspace is directly over those runways? Of course you can. Now, the only thing that you need to figure out now is what exactly is the altitude of that Class B layer that's directly over Fort Worth Alliance AFWs. Now, you can't see it on this chart here, but as I zoom out, you can follow that layer all the way down to where you see it says 110/40. That is the correct layer of Class B airspace that is directly over Fort Worth Alliance AFW. Now, before I get any bounce back from you guys, and I know I will, in regard to what's on the other side of that Class D airspace, let me explain this to you. You see, the other side of that Class D airspace has a layer above it, and that layer says 110/30. That means that the floor of that Class B airspace that's directly above the other side of that Class D at Fort Alliance is at 3,000 feet MSL. So the question here is, which I know you're going to ask, is what altitude does Class D airspace actually extend up to? And that's very simple to understand, because if you look at the little blue box with the -30 in it, it tells you that that class of airspace, Class D, will go up to, but not including 3,000 feet. So therefore, the altitude of the other side of that will go up to, or should I say the altitude of that airspace completely at Fort Worth Alliance will go up to 2,999 feet MSL, and then you will see Class B airspace kicking in. That layer, the floor of Class B, will start at 3,000 feet MSL and go all the way up to 11,000 feet MSL. Now, let me show you this on the actual sectional chart, or better yet, I have a drawing that I did. Let me show you this drawing so that way you'll understand this in detail, and I'll also refer back to the sectional chart as well, so that way you'll have a very good idea, a good understanding about how this is being explained to you. Now, I already know that some of you are going to criticize, comment on, or crack up at my artwork, right? But just know that it's not to scale, and I did my best to represent it. Notice how Class D airspace altitude limit is 2,999 feet MSL. That's because you're seeing the -30 box there, and that box means that the airspace will extend, or as the legend says, will go up to, but not including 3,000 feet MSL. In other words, you can fly up to 3,000 feet, but you can't touch it. So therefore, the highest legal altitude that can be obtained with Class D airspace here will be 2,999 feet MSL. Now, here's something else that's not often explained properly. Notice that at 2,999 feet MSL, well, that's the limit, or the legal limit, for Class D airspace, but the question is all the way up to 4,000 feet MSL for Class B airspace, the floor of Class B. What exactly is the airspace that is in between Class D and Class B airspace? This question comes up all the time. You see, there is an airspace that is everywhere. Whenever you have something that you need to fill in the gaps, so to speak, or you have airspace that needs to be filled in where there's nothing there, there will always be a classification for that airspace because it's everywhere, and that classification is Class E airspace. Now, before I remove this beautiful artwork, I want you to stare at it just for a few seconds. Look at it. Look at where everything is. Orient yourself. Understand where the runways are in comparison to the airspace that is directly above for Class B, where Class D's legal limit is. Understand where Class B at 3,000 feet MSL begins. Know all of this, and now that you are staring at this, let me go back to the sectional chart without even saying a word to see if you understand it. You see how you feel differently now, and it's less confusing because of the way it was explained? Looking at the sectional chart now for Fort Worth Alliance AFW, you can clearly understand where the runways are in relation to what floor of Class B airspace is directly above it. You can also see that there's a floor of Class B airspace within the Class D airspace underneath that is 3,000 feet MSL, which is not over the runway. You also see that Class D airspace will extend up to but not including 3,000 feet because there's a 30 with a minus sign inside of a box within that airspace, so therefore the altitude is 2,999 feet. And tying everything together for what we've been learning for a few minutes, you see that the airport runways are blue. So what does that tell you? It indicates that there is a control tower. So do you see how all of this is just coming together and you have a clear perspective and a clear understanding about this particular section of a sectional chart? So that way, if you have this understanding about this one thing in detail that we've gone over, if you see this and you understand it, then more than likely you're going to be able to look at everything else on a sectional chart and understand it in the same exact way. Okay, so I hope that you're all getting some good information from this video so far. If you are, it'll help if you hit that like button. It'll boost the algorithm up so a lot of other people who are watching will be able to understand that this video is actually out there. They'll be able to benefit from some of the information from it. But I want to take some time right now just to tell you about my website. You see, when you become a member of my website at MikeSytes.com, you're not just getting another study guide website, you're getting me. You see, I built this website differently for a specific purpose. Every study guide in this website is structured to make the topics actually click. They're filled with illustrations and visuals and examples and 10-question quizzes at the end of each study block, so that way you'll be able to test yourself. Then there are post-tests and final exams that are designed to make sure that you truly understand the material and not just memorize the answers. The tests themselves are designed to teach you, and the explanations behind the answers connect the dots to build real-world understanding. But honestly, the biggest difference between my website and the other study guide websites is that this actually has a human connection. Unlike other websites, you're completely on your own. But here at MikeSytes.com, members can reach out to me directly, sometimes through messages, chats, conversations, and in some cases, a phone call or even a Zoom conference. You're going to find that sometimes learning does not just come down to intelligence. Sometimes you're just missing that piece of the puzzle, that one explanation, that one visual, that one moment where everything just makes sense. It's magical. And maybe, just maybe, I could be the instructor holding the missing piece of the puzzle. That's what MikeSytes.com is really about. It's not just you passing the Part 107 exam, it's about you fully understanding it. And that's the reason you need to sign up. Click the link in the video description so you can get started. Now let's get back to the video. Okay, so another difficult topic that nobody really explains has to do with one of the most confusing topics on the FAA Part 107 exam: airport runways, runway numbers, magnetic headings. And why is all of this so important? Why does it really matter for drone pilots? Well, a lot of people just memorize this information just long enough to pass the exam, but they never truly understand why it's so important. And honestly, that's dangerous, because understanding runway orientation, aircraft headings, can help you avoid a collision with a manned aircraft doing a drone operation near an airport. So in this video, in this section of the video, I'm going to break this down for you in a way that actually makes sense. I'm going to explain this to you. So whenever it is that you're thinking about airport runways and orientations and magnetic headings, well, the most appropriate thing to do is just to draw something that looks like a compass. And you see that I've drawn a complete circle here just to orient myself. But what I'm going to do now is to show you how to reference north, south, east, and west. So you see the first one, which is north, is either going to be 0 degrees or it's going to be 360 degrees. And pay attention that I drew the arrow pointing north because that will be the direction of the aircraft. Also, the direction of the aircraft is 90 degrees pointing towards the east. And if I go south, an aircraft heading in a southerly direction will be heading at 180 degrees magnetic. And the reason that this is magnetic, because remember, we're referring to compass settings. Now you also see that I've just drawn the arrow going west, and that will be 270 degrees. Now I want you to just memorize this image just for a moment, imprint this in the back of your head so you know exactly exactly where everything is. Now, I'm going to draw a runway so that way you can understand the orientation, because this can be a little bit confusing at times. I know it was for me. Now, notice that I have one end of the runway at 90 degrees and the other end is pointed at 270 degrees. So a great question to ask here is, what would the runway numbers be and where would those numbers be placed in regard to the orientation of the runways as you see them right now? So let's reverse the thinking as you've been taught previously before. When you see 270 degrees, drop the 0 and that's going to be runway 27. And if a plane was coming in to land on runway 27, well, the direction of that aircraft will be the same direction as you see going west. So where are the runway numbers 27 going to be placed? Exactly in the same place that the aircraft is touching down, going west towards 270 degrees magnetic heading. Now, if we do the same exact thing for an aircraft landing on runway 9, you see that the runway is set up so that way the aircraft will touch down on runway 9 heading towards 90 degrees east, magnetic heading. Now, what will trip you up is thinking that the 27 has to go near 270 degrees and the 09 has to go near 90 degrees. So remember two things in this specific order. What direction is the aircraft heading by degrees? And also, where will the plane's wheels touch down first on the runway? Now, let's take a look at 360 degrees as opposed to 180 degrees magnetic heading. And I'm going to draw a runway again. Please don't mind my artwork. I know I'm doing the best I can here. You can see that the runway that I'm illustrating now is in the direction of 360 degrees, and the other side of that runway is in the direction of 180 degrees. And I'm going to speed up the video here a little bit so that way I can draw the runway numbers, but you already know where those numbers should go because we just went over that, right? But what I want you to understand is that on the opposite side of each runway, the way you can figure out what the runway numbers will be or what the magnetic heading will be is just simply add or subtract 180 degrees. And also keep in mind that all of the runway numbers will be exactly 10 degrees apart, so you will not see runway 45. Instead, you're going to see runway 50, runway 60, runway 120. This is the explanation for runway numbers. Now, one of the most difficult topics to understand is the positioning of an aircraft. It is one of the most misunderstood Part 107 topics. Most of the students do not truly know how to visualize where an aircraft is located in regard to a particular runway heading. Now, I've drawn an illustration and put it on screen so that way you'd be able to visualize exactly what's going on here, because there is something that's hidden, very elusive, that if you don't get it, you won't understand it, you won't be able to know how to answer the questions correctly on the Part 107 exam. So here it is. If, for example, an aircraft is located on the downwind leg of runway 16, then where is the aircraft located? That is a question that is a very common question. It comes up all the time. So I'm putting the diagram on screen so we can explain this. Now, you see that there is runway 16, and you also see that there's 160 degrees. So that's going to give you an indication, based on what we already went through in this video, of where that airplane is going to be heading, the direction it's going to be heading on final approach, on landing. Where is that aircraft going to be heading? In what direction? Well, you already know this. It's going to be heading on a southeasterly direction. So if it's heading in that direction, then the downwind leg will be the opposite direction, which will be northwest. So anytime you hear the downwind leg, that always means that it will be in the opposite direction of the runway. So it's easy to understand that this aircraft is positioned east of the runway. Now, here's the thing. Right now, you're assuming that the downwind leg is on the east side of the airport, and the reason that you're assuming that is because that is the standard protocol for airports. A left-hand traffic pattern means that the plane is parallel to the runway and traveling or flying in the opposite direction and will be making left-hand turns to eventually land on runway 16. So here is the part that needs to be explained. You see, I had to explain this to one of the members on my website because he did not take into consideration that the question was referring to a right-hand traffic pattern, not a left-hand traffic pattern. So therefore, if you assume that you're flying on the opposite direction and that you're flying on a left-hand traffic pattern, even though or despite the fact that the question says right-hand traffic pattern, you're going to get the answer wrong. So the thing that you need to pay attention to, the thing that needs to be explained, is that you need to pay attention to the one most crucial important thing. What is the traffic pattern direction, or what type of traffic pattern is at that particular airport? Is it a left-hand traffic pattern or right-hand traffic pattern? Because in this particular scenario, if it were a right-hand traffic pattern that the question was asking you or indicating, then it wouldn't be east that the aircraft is located. It would be that the aircraft is located west of the airport. You see why I had to explain that to you? So this is one of the things that I wanted to clarify based on some of the questions that have been coming in from the members on my website. Now, here's something that's interesting that I think needs to be explained. It came in from a subscriber on this channel, and the question was, if I am standing on top of a mountain and there are clouds beneath me or below me, will my drone still be able to climb 400 feet above the height of that structure? Now, this is a very good question because it makes you really think about the fact that, wait a minute, I'm standing on top of a mountain. And by the way, let's clarify and explain something that I just said and I may have recently said on previous videos. A mountain is not a structure. Under FAA regulations, a mountain is considered as terrain, not a structure. So 400 feet above a structure, that rule does not apply to mountains. But you can fly 400 feet above a mountain because 400 feet above the immediate or utmost limit of that mountain or terrain is perfectly legal. Under FAA Part 107, the normal altitude is 400 feet above ground level or AGL. But ground level means just that. It means the terrain directly beneath the drone. And to explain this even further, as the terrain rises, your maximum allowable altitude rises with it. Now, here we go back to the original question again, because you already know that you can extend up to 400 feet above the surface or AGL, above ground level. But the question is mentioning about the clouds that are below. So the question of whether or not you can fly wherever it is that you're standing on top of that mountain, well, that's the question. So here's the answer. Potentially. Notice how I used that word instead of saying yes or no. You see, potentially, but only if you still comply with FAA Part 107 rules and regulations in regard to cloud clearance and visual line of sight. Now, I just mentioned two things to you: cloud clearance, visual line of sight. Now, the clouds are below you. So therefore, you have to comply with cloud clearance rules. You have to be 500 feet below clouds, and you must be 2,000 feet away from the clouds. That's rule number one. The second rule, number two, visual line of sight, VLOS. If that drone is below the clouds, are you still going to be able to see it with visual line of sight rules? Those are two crucial things that you have to understand when we're in this particular type of scenario. So in this situation, if all three of those things that I just mentioned, 500 feet below, 2,000 feet away, visual line of sight, if those three things are not applicable, then you cannot fly this drone legally. Now, for the next 5 topics, we're going to be focusing on the remote pilot in command. And the reason for this is because it's not something that's usually explained, and the FAA is focusing on the remote pilot in command in regard to decision making and what you should do in certain situations. Here are some of the things that we're going to cover in the next 5 topics. For example, what happens when you sell a drone? Does the FAA registration transfer with that? How many days do you have to update the information? Who's responsible if the new owner flies this drone legally before they actually register it? Who is the person that's responsible? These are things that we have to go over. So let's start with the first thing first, the FAA drone registration. Now, this is one of the biggest misconceptions that a drone, whenever you register it, most people think that the FAA registration belongs to the aircraft. That is entirely incorrect. The registration of that drone belongs to the owner. That means that when you sell a drone, the FAA registration does not automatically transfer to the buyer. The new owner must register the aircraft under their FAA account before operating it. This is so important because many pilots assume, well, the registration number is already on the drone, so it should be good to go to sell it. No, you need to cancel that FAA registration as the owner first before you actually sell that drone, and the new owner must register the drone before they actually fly it. So, what is the explanation for this process? Well, if you sell your drone, you should remove it from the FAA drone zone inventory. This is going to prevent any confusion about who the owner is and who takes responsibility. Think about it this way. If the aircraft is listed under your account and something happens with that drone, well, you don't want any questions about whether or not you're still the operator or owner of that drone, do you? So this is what you need to do to take the proper steps. Log into your drone zone account, remove the aircraft or cancel it, and keep the records of that transaction. Now, if you're the buyer of the drone, before you actually fly that drone, you must create your own FAA drone zone account and register the drone and place that registration number on the aircraft. This applies to Part 107 operators, and recreational operations are quite different. But the key point is that the buyer cannot legally rely on the previous owner's registration. The registration must reflect the current ownership. Okay, let's explain registration cancellation if the drone is lost or sold or exported. What do you do in this situation? Well, if the FAA asks you a question, which they will on the exam because I've seen it come up all the time, and the question is basically, within how many days must a small unmanned aircraft registration be updated after the aircraft is lost, stolen, or exported? And this question has been coming up on the Part 107 exam, and I have not been able to find anything that gives me this explanation unless we go to not Part 107, but referring to Part 48 of the Code of Federal Regulations, specifically Part 48.115. You see, the question is pointing to the updating of information, not specifically canceling the information, because when you think about all of this, the only thing that you'll be remembering when you're taking the exam is the 30-day address change and the 10-day incident reporting, and the FAA will sneakily and trickily put these two things on the answer choices. Why would they do that? And you don't even know what the answer is, so you get confused. And therefore, you get the question and the answer confused so that you answer the question incorrectly. So here's the thing. According to Part 48 of the Code of Federal Regulations, whenever these updates are required or need to be implemented, you have 14 days to do that update. This is actually a great hidden unexplained Part 107 knowledge test topic. Most instructors incorrectly teach 30 days for everything, but you can clearly see that this is coming from not Part 107. It's coming from 14 CFR 48.115. So now let's talk about a visual observer, whether or not they can assume control of an aircraft. And this is one of the most misunderstood, unexplained topics for the Part 107 concepts. You see, a visual observer, or VO, can only assist the remote pilot in command. They can scan for traffic or obstacles, and they must maintain situational awareness, VLOS, visual line of sight. You see, the VO is not required to be certified, and just so you know, very important, the VO cannot simply just take over the controls of an aircraft unless they are separately acting as a qualified remote pilot, or they are under the direct operational structure allowing that transfer. So here's the thing. Most students incorrectly assume that the VO is basically like a co-pilot, and that is not correct. A VO is not a co-pilot. The FAA treats visual observers as a support personnel, not a secondary pilot by default. So imagine this. You're flying a commercial operation, which is falling under Part 107 because all commercial operations fall under Part 107. And your visual observer taps you on the shoulder and says, "Go take a bathroom break. I will continue the flight." Well, if you leave, then you'd be in violation because the remote pilot in command must be actively present supervising while a person is operating the drone. So you just can't simply hand over the controls on a commercial operation to a VO that's not certified or licensed. And even if you could, why would you want to do that? They're not trained. They're not educated. They have no knowledge of being able to fly an aircraft on a commercial operation as you do. So you're the remote pilot in command. These are the decisions that you have to make whenever it is that you're actively flying a commercial operation, and the FAA wants to know that you know these things right off the top of your head and you don't have to think about it. Now, let's talk about the remote pilot in command's authority. See these guns? You see, most courses will tell you that the remote pilot in command has a responsibility primarily for safety, but they don't go deep into explaining the fact that the FAA is granting you the authority as a remote pilot to do much more. You see, the remote pilot in command can refuse a mission. They can terminate a flight. They can override a client's demands when you have those clients who are saying, "I want you to do this, I want you to do that." And you can say, "We're not doing that. I have to follow FAA rules and regulations." They can reject unsafe crew participation. A remote pilot can cancel an operation due to the fact that he is fatigued, or there is a member of the crew that's fatigued, or there is some environmental concern that's going on where he or she does not agree with. So you see, when you tie all of these concepts together, we're talking about aeronautical decision-making, risk management, operational authority. All of these things have to do with the power that's granted to a remote pilot in command. And without you understanding this power, you would be limited in thinking that you can only do a certain thing or certain things where you have the power to be able to make decisions much more than just safety. Okay, so for the next topic, we're talking about load factor, an extremely important topic for the Part 107 exam. And the reason that it's so important is because most students simply memorize the answers to this topic without truly understanding what's happening aerodynamically. We're talking about load factor during a banked turn. We're talking about why stall speed increases in a turn. And all of these are very important. But first, I want you to know that in my playlist, there are the 2025 videos. You need to be watching all of those videos also. All of the material and information on those videos are relevant, and they're still relevant. They're going to be relevant. So watch all of those videos also. All of you who are asking me whether or not you should be watching those videos, you shouldn't be asking that question. You know that all of the topics on those 2025 videos are all extremely important. So let's go back and talk about this load factor now. Let's first establish something very important. Imagine an aircraft flying perfectly level. I mean straight and level flight. It's not climbing, it's not descending, it's not turning, it's not accelerating. In that condition, the aircraft is in equilibrium. That means that the upward force of lift is equal to the downward force of gravity. The wings are producing just enough lift to support the aircraft's weight. We're talking about aerodynamics, the things that no one wants to explain to you, but you need to know this information. So what does this all mean? Equilibrium, straight and level flight, lift. What it means is that if you were standing in the aisle of an airplane and the conditions were as such straight and level flight, then you would feel as if it was under normal conditions of the Earth. Your body would be experiencing normal Earth gravity. And that condition is termed or classified as 1G, 1G force. Right now, where you stand or where you're sitting, you are experiencing 1G right now. You see, on a straight and level flight, the aircraft, the pilot, everything inside, all are experiencing 1G. In simple terms, the wings are supporting the aircraft's normal weight. So the aircraft weighs 2,000 pounds. The wings are carrying 2,000 pounds of aerodynamic load or aerodynamic lift. So that way you are experiencing 1G, the same thing that you're experiencing right now. So now that you know this, let's say that in order to maintain this balance, that the aircraft must be traveling at 100 miles per hour and cannot go anything below that, or else it will begin to stall. And the reason it will stall is because those wings need to have at least 100 miles per hour in order to generate enough lift to support the weight of the aircraft. And theoretically, you could fly like that forever as long as you had a lifetime supply of fuel and your engines don't blow up. But guess what happens whenever it is that the airplane now starts to take a banked turn? Well, things start feeling different. It's starting to get heavier and you feel the load factor increasing, and the aircraft is not performing with the equilibrium that it had before, and it's starting to feel heavy because the wings can't produce enough lift to keep the aircraft up in the air. So what happens? It wants to descend. It wants to go down, and you have to do something to keep the aircraft up in the air. Pilots know this. There are two factors that's happening here. One is the increased angle of bank, and two is the increased load factor. And what you need to put into your head is that the load factor is the G-force. Remember when you were at 1G, everything was normal, straight and level. And now that you're making a turn, that G-force or load factor is increasing. So the more you turn and the more you bank, then the G-force is going from the normal 1G to 2G, 3G. And before, when the plane would stall at anything below 100 miles an hour, well, now it's going to stall at anything below 200 miles an hour, so your stall speed increased because of the increased load factor. So the last topic is about FAA certification age. 3 questions I'm going to ask before I actually explain this. Do you need to be 16 years of age to take the Part 107 knowledge test? Can you be 14 years old to pass the exam early? And if so, can you simply wait until you're 16 years of age to get your certificate automatically? Well, this topic confuses a lot of people because the FAA separates taking the knowledge test from actually qualifying for the remote pilot certificate. Let me explain. Let's start with the actual FAA certification requirement. Under 14 CFR Part 107.61, you must be 16 years of age to receive the remote pilot certificate. This part is very clear, and you can't become a certified remote pilot until you are 16 years of age after passing the Part 107 exam. Now, here's where it gets confusing. Many people assume that since you must be 16 years of age to get your certificate, then you must also be 16 years of age to take the exam. But the FAA regulations do not specifically say that. FAA rules specifically discuss certification eligibility, not testing eligibility. So technically, a person who is younger than 16 years of age can still be allowed to sit in and take the FAA knowledge test at an approved testing center. That means that a 14-year-old could potentially take the test, pass the Part 107 exam, but passing the Part 107 exam does not mean that they will receive their certificate. This is a very important distinction. And what's so revealing in regard to how I'm summing up this explanation is that if a 14-year-old takes and passes the Part 107 knowledge test, they still cannot receive the remote pilot certificate until they turn 16. The knowledge test remains valid for 24 months. So, if they turn 16 before the test expires, they can apply for the certificate without taking another initial exam. However, if the knowledge test expires before the eligible certification, they must retake the FAA knowledge exam. They cannot use the recurring online training because the recurring training is only for pilots who are already certified and already hold their remote pilot certificate. I hope I gave you some great information on this video. Stay tuned, I'm going to have the next one coming up. But all of you, if you want to become a member, go ahead and sign up. Until then, I will see you all on the next video.